One of the things that I love is that two films idea of your life, and there's like two stories you can tell. One that is safe and full of regret, and one that is risky and full of pride and joy.
Hello. Hi. So I'm going to talk more about my journey. I am going to talk about Tech Will Save Us, but based on what Eamon just said, I think I'm going to talk about basically my journey to kind of making the most out of my life, my opportunities, kind of everything I've done. And I kind of titled it based on some of the stuff that happened yesterday around kind of aliveness, and I'll kind of get to that. But it's all the things I've done to kind of make sure that I'm always kind of grabbing the things around me as best as I can. And for me, I guess my life is, I've never really looked for kind of work-life balance. I've always looked for kind of blend. So my work and my life and my family have always been really kind of interconnected. So all the stuff I'm going to talk about is really kind of how I've kind of built that over time. And I'm going to put a timer so I don't go over time. So I was born in Los Angeles, and I went to school in Rhode Island and New York, and I think I kind of grew up in New York. It's where I found my first independence. I had my first flat, so I really kind of grew up in New York. And I think I learned how to live in Italy. So I lived in Italy for 3 years. It's where I met my husband and my co-founder. And I think that's where I really learned kind of the qualities of how I wanted to live my life. And then I think I kind of was enlightened, I guess you can say, in London. So I've lived in London for almost 9 years now. I've always lived in East London, which I think is maybe one of the most creative, exciting places in London. But that's where I've started a business. I have a family, I'm a mom, I have my home. And I think London's really been kind of a place where I've been able to really kind of manifest all of my experiences in kind of like real time. So I'm going to go through like a few things that I've experimented with over time that I think have kind of led me to kind of what I'm doing now. Someone once asked me, have you ever felt like everything you've done in your life has led to this one thing? And I remember when she said that to me, I was like, no, I don't feel that. And I think I kind of feel that now, which is just the most amazing feeling. So I'm going to talk about kind of my kind of experiments with social impact. The way I view kind of entrepreneurship is kind of activism, learning by doing. So as a designer, I think I'm always putting things in the world, getting feedback, testing it. I'm always learning by putting stuff out in the world, which I think is a really important practice. I'm going to talk about intrapreneurship. So lots of people talk about entrepreneurship, like starting your business, doing your own thing, which I think is super important. But I did a lot of stuff inside of organizations. I used it as a platform to make things. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about designing for people. So for me, design is about putting people at the center of your work. So I'm going to talk about how I do that, all in the kind of pursuit of this quality of aliveness. So I had a corporate job. I worked as a design director at an international branding company called Wolf Olins for about 9 years, and it was amazing. So I worked with all kinds of different organizations like General Electric. I launched this company called Red, which was with Bono, where we launched, basically, we branded products to help with antiretrovirals in Africa. So really kind of hacked kind of consumerism to really support kind of bigger purposes. But at the same time, I always had like side projects and side practices where I used design, whether it was to kind of curate projects like, so I did this thing at the V&A called the Village Fete, where we turned the V&A late nights into kind of a village festival with designers making all different kinds of activities, or kind of mapping projects in South Africa using balloons as like symbols for mapping. So I was always kind of experimenting with kind of participatory design and kind of design in this really broad sense of the word. And I think where I started really discovering this kind of idea of social impact and how my practice could really manifest in slightly wider ways was a project that I did with an architecture collective called Exist. So they're an architecture collective from France, and they build semi-autonomous and kind of temporary architecture. And so what we did is we built a windmill and a public oven in Dalston. We worked with a artist named Agnes Dean, and we planted a wheat field in Dalston, and for those of you that know Dalston, it's this really urban kind of part of East London. And the windmill became essentially a platform for the community to basically bake bread together. So it was this like leveler of the community. So there's a ton of people from Africa, from Turkey, a ton of hipsters, and bread became this kind of leveling factor. And so the windmill was a functioning windmill. We ground wheat that we then used to bake bread. And it became this platform for community, for kind of participation. It became a place just to rest and relax together. And one of the things we did there, which was super fun, was we baked a local currency. So art exhibitions have a tendency to kind of land in a community and not really incorporate the rest of the community. And so baking a currency meant that we could actually add value to the rest of the community. So the local restaurants accepted it, the local shops accepted it, and basically, I mean, it was bread coins, basically, and the community made it themselves. And this meant that as this exhibition was in Dalston, the rest of the community could benefit from the kind of people that were in that community. And also, it was this really fun way of like having a new kind of value that was an exchange that was different than just monetary. So the next thing that I started to experiment with was activism through entrepreneurship. And this was a project called The Store for Tomorrow, where basically there was a bunch of businesses that were developing where they weren't asking for money as a form of value. They were asking for other kinds of value. So they were asking for time or translation or in some cases parking spots. So Streetcar needed parking spots to basically be a real organization. And so we curated a collection of these kind of new businesses, which we called kind of platforms for new kinds of value. And it was a store where you could actually kind of buy things, but you couldn't buy them with money. You had to buy them with other forms of value. So the businesses ranged from one laptop per child, which was this amazing computer that was created by Nicholas Negroponte, which was given and created, given to lots of different countries around the world. And what they needed was translation. So in order for you to buy one of these laptops, you had to basically be able to translate their resources into Igbo or Thai or some language that would make it really accessible. In the case of Streetcar, they needed parking spots. So the more parking spots there were, the more cars would be in the community. And so in order to buy the product, you had to essentially, if you had a parking spot or knew someone that had a parking spot, donate a parking spot. So this exchange of value became really important in the process. So basically the store changed from a store of objects or products to a store of commitments. And so we had this currency which was boxes, and you had to basically commit on the spot to the thing that you could give in order to exchange that value. And again, I think this kind of live participation in kind of how business was kind of changing the way we interact with each other in society was really, really important for me at the time. And I did it at Wolfolen, so it was really a platform for me to kind of experiment with this. And it was also transforming the way business was being kind of manifested in the world. And so the next kind of transition, I think, for me was this idea of learning by doing. So as a designer, as a maker, I have a really hard time understanding something unless I put it in the world. I have to kind of see people's responses. I have to understand how people are going to engage with something to feel confident that I've created something that is kind of valuable. I think it's like constantly experimenting. So the way I did this was, so again, I was still at Wolfolen's at the time, and I had just started to do a master's in responsibility and business practice. And this was really about kind of sustainability and values and the role of business in society. And similar to some of the speakers yesterday, I was really frustrated. I was really angry that I felt so passionate about some of these topics, and yet my colleagues either didn't care or didn't understand or didn't know, or the topic was too big and it was really hard to translate. And so I began to kind of experiment with, how do you meet people where they're at? How do you not just kind of preach what you believe to people? How do you create experiences that help people come to their own conclusions? And so the way we did this was, so we had this massive roof at Wolfolen's that was basically blank. It was empty. And we worked with a local charity called Global Generation, which is a group of young people that build roof gardens on top of buildings in King's Cross. and we basically built a roof garden with them. So we invited them to come to the roof. We wove willow baskets. We made big kind of planters where we basically planted a garden. Wolfholdens has a kitchen, so a restaurant. So basically we created a physical manifestation of a closed loop. So we had food that we ate in the kitchen. We captured rainwater. We did all our own composting. And rather than me preaching to a bunch of like Oxford and Cambridge graduates that were now, consultants, how important this was, they were having conversations with a local Bangladeshi girl weaving a basket, or we were talking about challenges within some of the businesses we were working with. And so rather than me preaching this kind of passion I had, I kind of did it through action. I did it through creating an experience that people could kind of learn and make and do things together. And I think for me this started to kind of really frame what I think sustainability is. I don't think it's just about big, giant change. I think that's really important, but I think actually it's about people and relationships and how we kind of create common languages to be able to solve what are such complex projects that no one project is ever going to solve it. And this was, again, our kind of small way of beginning to have a dialogue around the importance of these kinds of things in our work. And also it brought a lot of people just like pure joy. So this is the chef, and like it just was this joyful way of experiencing something which is actually terrifying and scary and complicated, but it gave us, again, a dialogue and a way of doing that together that wasn't so negative, which I thought was really important. So all of this kind of is about entrepreneurship. So while I was at Wolfholdens, I just used it as a platform. So I was working, but I used this kind of international organization as a platform for experimenting. And I was really fortunate that I had people that supported me, but it was pretty awesome to experiment within an organization, not just doing it on your own, but having the resources, the support to really experiment like that. And so I guess my message for a kind of younger audience, like I didn't even know what entrepreneurship was when I started, but just kind of naturally saw this as a platform I could use. And so from the roof garden, basically the next kind of evolution was actually to start a business in the business. So we started with the same group of young people, basically a social enterprise. So they built the social enterprise, they named it, we did a business model canvas on it. It was called the Honey Club, and it was basically a membership model where we brought bees to the roof next to the garden. And the membership was about the local businesses in the community participating in learning and engaging in sustainability in tangible ways. So we used, again, the kind of platform of this enterprise to bring the community together. And it just so happened that the community were people like Google and Fight and Press and Eurostar. So these were like big organizations. So they became members, and part of the membership was, one, producing amazing honey that was locally produced, that basically their businesses could have as part of the membership. But it was also about events and activities and training. So people trained to be beekeepers. We did rotations of people keeping bees in King's Cross. We had events where people talked about the importance of bees, not just as kind of an environmental part of our ecosystem, but actually as kind of interesting examples of community, interesting examples of kind of working relationships. We had this architect come and talk about the hexagon and how important that is in design, what a strong shape that is. So it really just became an excuse for people to engage with sustainability in a really tangible way. And again, this was in a business. We started it together. It's still there. And it doesn't even matter if anyone knows that I was a part of it, because it has this legacy which is kind of more important than my involvement in it, which I think is kind of really important when you're kind of creating things. So all of this has led to kind of what I'm doing now. And it really is like all the things I've been excited about and interested in and kind of didn't know I was doing until I kind of bring it all together in what we're doing today. So designing for people. So I said at the beginning that for me design is about putting people at the center of my work. So it's not about just what it looks like or what it kind of feels like. It's really about the kind of engagement it has with people that are using those products. So the story of the most recent experience kind of starts in two unlikely places. One is we found a laptop in our trash can in Hackney, which started a dialogue around the fact that we have this very weird relationship with tech. We're super sophisticated users of it, but quite unsophisticated producers of it. In fact, we don't really know what's in our tech. It's closed, it's designed to be closed. It's not designed for us to open it and make with it, which was partially the reason why someone just threw away a perfectly good laptop. And the second thing was I went to this really awesome conference in Wales called the Do Lectures. So I went to the Do Lectures in 2011 or 10, I can't remember. And it was the first time that this was when it was at Forest. And it was the first time I actually started talking about this idea, this business, as a thing. And one thing that I kind of experiment with a lot is talking about stuff as a way of making it real. I think sometimes when you language something, when you just share it with someone, it becomes real in a way that it isn't when it's in your head. And so I kind of said during that weekend, I was going to talk about this new business project like it was real. So, so basically the kind of framework or the kind of problem that we were really investigating was this relationship with tech. So in the world, we have lots of tech, and yet we're just really consuming it. We just don't really understand how to make with it. At the same time, we were becoming a parent, and there's something about having a kid born with an iPad that is exciting and slightly terrifying. I wanted him to be technically savvy. I want him to understand how to use tech in every possible way. But as a parent, there just aren't many options. You're kind of faced with like iPads or like toys that are plastic with tech in it, and that just didn't feel like enough. And kids are born fearless. They're born curious about tech, and yet they don't really have options to take it apart, to put it together. And those that do, they find it because they're naturally drawn to it, not necessarily because it's accessible. So this other kind of stat started kind of raising a kind of interesting idea, which is 65% of kids in primary school will have jobs that don't exist. And I know you guys aren't in primary school, but I can already see it in this room that you guys are like paving a path for what your future will be like that might not exist yet, which is totally exciting and also like a pretty daunting experience. And tech will be at the center of most people's jobs in the future, or most people's practices. And yet, if we don't understand how to use it, then we are kind of limited in our capacity to be able to make with it and investigate and prototype. So, long story short, so we started an organization called Technology Will Save Us. And basically what we do, we started by doing workshops. So again, this kind of learning by doing. We made a quick product. We did a bunch of workshops. We tested it with parents, with kids. And we learned really quickly that we could kitify this. We could put all of these components and things in a box, create digital resources, and make it way more scalable than just us hosting workshops. And for us, the kind of impetus of this was not just staying small. We wanted this to be accessible to parents around the kitchen table, schools, maker spaces. People could make anywhere and everywhere. So the mission of the organization is basically around sparking the creative imagination of young people with hands-on tech. So no two kids are the same. Someone's going to get excited about electronics, someone's going to love coding, someone's going to love design, and all of that is just as important. And if you never learn how to make with it, you don't know what your skills are. You don't know if you like it or not. So what we've created is basically a range of make-it-yourself kits and digital tools that help kids to make, play, code, and invent with tech. And they can happen anywhere. So the range is both accessible by price as well as by skill. So super low barrier to entry, anyone can make it, but super high ceiling, which means if you are excited and you want to do more, you can do lots of other things with it. And from price, it ranges from 15 to 65 pounds. So we don't want, you know, a 200-pound product for an 8-year-old is like a pretty expensive investment. So we really wanted these to be accessible. So the kits range from things like electronic Play-Doh, where you make your own conductive dough. You make LEDs turn on, buzzers buzz, motor spin. Basically, you're making circuits, and you're 4 years old, because who doesn't like Play-Doh? So it's a super easy way of basically starting to create circuits with tech. Things like the DIY speaker, where you make your own amplifier, then you design and construct speakers out of anything. So this one's made out of a balloon, because in one of our workshops, a little girl made one out of a balloon, and it sounded so awesome. We now include a balloon in all of the kits. kits as your first speaker. Later today, Daniel, my co-founder and husband, is doing a workshop on the Thirsty Plant Kit. You make a moisture sensor out of plaster and nails. It's solar powered, and when your plant needs watering, an LED flashes to tell you to water your plants. Then you can make an automatic watering can. You can make a tweet. So there's basically an extension of different things you can do with the kit, all the way to things like our gamer kit, where you actually make your own games console. Then you learn how to program and invent your own games. So you learn what's your scoring system, what's your character, and you actually learn programming to create games on a games console that you actually have to build yourself. So again, a whole range of different themes and ways for kids to interact with tech in productive and creative ways. And I think over time what we've learned is that this is really about building a category. This isn't just about kind of kits of the past. This is a category which is not Lego. It's not kind of off the technology, kind of just construction. And it's not old science kits. It's this place in between. It's not for boys. It's not for girls. It's for all of them. So we don't make pink kits and blue kits and girls like tutus and boys like other things. There's a gender neutrality because we lead with what you can do with the tech, not with the tech itself, which is super important. And we have all different kinds of people using our kits kind of everywhere. So we have learning partners like the Great Ormond Street Hospital, the Princess Trust, Barclays, using our kits as part of programs. We have teachers using our kits in classrooms. We have parents and kids doing them around the kitchen table. So we have a really amazing range of different kinds of people using our products, which is really exciting. And super important to the way we develop our products is this kind of user-centered approach to design. So we actually design our kits with kids. So we basically do big research projects to understand kind of big newsworthy trends. Those become the beginning of a product development process where we then design with kids. So this is, again, kind of from some of my past work, like really designing with people at the center of it. We don't decide what the thing is before. We make prototypes. We put it in the hands of kids. We let them test it. That informs how we might develop a product. And that becomes this really iterative process, which is super, super exciting. I'm going to skip. So a new kit that we made, which is really important. So the BBC Microbit, it's our first co-created product with the BBC. It's basically a pocket-sized computer that you can make and code with. So you can program little buttons. You can program an LED screen. It has Bluetooth, so you can do Internet of Things projects. It has an edge connector, so you can connect it to all of our kits. You can connect it to Arduinos. You can connect it to Raspberry Pis. It has a compass you can place yourself and an accelerometer. So basically you can invent like all different kinds of things with this product, and it's going to be given to 1 million 12-year-olds this year for free. So basically every single kind of year 7 will get one of these as part of their learning. So this is the kind of work we do, and I guess the thing I really wanted to share was how all of these experiments that I've been doing kind of in my work and life practice have kind of really led to something which encompasses, I guess, like the breadth of what I'm interested in. And I don't think I would have gotten there if I didn't give myself the space and the time and the freedom to kind of really experiment wherever I was at, whether that was in a business or outside of a business. So that is kind of what we do. So.